Hello and welcome to a week in Pixelverse. EA Games recently announced that it was going to be canceling BioWare's Anthem Next release that was going to come out and make the terribly received Anthem good. And I'm sure this disappointed a lot of hangers-on to Anthem's potential success in the future. The game had some impressive trailers early on, and it promises a pretty interesting idea on its face, mainly being able to fly around in various kinds of Iron Man suits, destroying fantasy aliens, with a big budget, well-known developer behind it. The harsh reality that I want to crack on in this video is that Anthem Next was never going to be a thing. It didn't die so much as it was probably just a lie. Not that developers weren't working on it and that they weren't trying to make it something special, but that EA and BioWare honestly didn't have any incentive to actually complete it. And overall, I think it's a pretty bad idea to trust that a big-name AAA developer is ever going to be able to deliver on something like a remarkable recovery after a terrible launch for a games as service that has a 10-year plan to become good eventually. Now, the fact that BioWare called this new release Anthem Next means that they were trying to hearken to our memory of No Man's Sky. Hello Games had a terrible release after having built up so much hype and so much expectation that it was the most anticipated game of its season. But that hype ended up being misplaced because the team lead of Hello Games was not a part of a major AAA company. He was not a marketer or a spokesperson. He was just a normal guy making video games that suddenly got lots of support from Sony and was thrust into the spotlight, and accidentally made a lot of promises and descriptions of the game that he really didn't intend to make. Having infuriated so many people with false expectations, he essentially took the team off of engaging on social media to simply put their nose to the grindstone and make the game good. No Man's Sky was a game that didn't exist because of a large publisher, didn't exist because of funding from investors. It was an honestly bizarre situation in which the concept, the core idea behind how the game was made, attracted Sony's attention, and then Sony gave them a spotlight and put Hello Games on a stage. When the game sold well and failed to impress, Sony essentially quietly removed itself from the picture, leaving Hello Games to clean up the mess. In other words, Hello Games was only beholden to a single group, namely its player base, the people who bought the game. And if they wanted to succeed as a studio, if they wanted to be able to make something else in the future, it was in Hello Games' best interest to make the game better. It was in their interest to put their nose to the grindstone and deliver on all of their promises that, once successful, luckily resulted in being able to release No Man's Sky Next later on. AAA game developers are not in the same situation. Their motivation is not actually to deliver great games to people. Now, that may seem counterintuitive because if you don't deliver great games, then you won't sell many games and then you won't be able to attract investors. Isn't that how it's supposed to work? Well, not really. Once a development company or a publisher goes public, is publicly traded on the stock market, you have to change your thinking. The end user of a product is no longer the primary customer of that business. Instead, it has become the stock investors. It has become the people who are paying the money for the studio to make things and continue and are looking to reinvest. This means that a game's reception doesn't matter as much as a game's day one sales. If your game makes a lot of money, whether it's good or bad, the investors will be happy. And if it doesn't make a lot of money, the investors will not be happy, and you may not be able to continue making more money for yourself. Most games-as-service games are specifically being created to deliver on this cycle, namely that they will create what is an incomplete, a barren, or empty game, with the promise of delivering more in the future, directed at the players, but it is more of a promise to the investors that more money will be coming in for the same amount of investment. The only time a AAA publicly traded developer or publisher has to worry is that if the reception is so drastically negative that they can predict that their next game's sales are going to suffer because of it. And thanks to the loyalty of fan bases, this rarely is ever the case, even when a game flops. But even if people understand the different motivations that a small development team versus a large AAA development company have, lots of people still defend or try to believe in the ability of larger or more popular studios of more popular names to deliver on that kind of improvement if something fails, or at least fails to make gamers happy. People love to bring up the Miyamoto quote that said that a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad, saying that, well, with enough time, and if you give them enough space, they can make the game good and enjoyable to play. My retort is that, well, the game was initially rushed, so it's forever bad, no matter how much time they invest, no matter how much they chase after that sunk cost fallacy. So more likely than not, they're going to take your initial purchase from your pre-order and move it on to the next project. They're not going to throw good money after bad. Other people like to bring up big name counterexamples of games that did release terribly and are committed to changing and improving the game. Most recently, Cyberpunk 2077 released in a completely horrible and broken state, and CD Projekt Red has made some very promising shows of good faith in terms of trying to fix the problems with the game. And so people are quick to point out, yes, look, CD Projekt Red is listening to the gamers. They've heard our frustrations and our outrage and are doing right by us. But then you find out that what actually happened is that CD Projekt Red had investment from the Czech government for the development of artificial intelligence software for this game. They had many investors which believed that they were lied to and are pulling their investment and suing the company. And you start seeing that, they have a lot more powerful, more wealthy people that they are beholden to that expect the game to be delivered and made playable, made better, made to protect the company's reputation so that the moneyed interests can be satisfied. You may also want to point to Final Fantasy XIV. When it was originally released, it was a terrible game that the players absolutely hated. Many people still played it, but it had such a negative reception that the negative reception caused outrage not just amongst its players, but amongst its investors. One of their main investors came out very publicly stating that he had been shamed for his involvement in this game, and it was only because of that loss of money from the investor, and because of the worry of the studios of Square Enix's reputation with other investors, that they took the game down and relaunched it as Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. It wasn't player outrage, it was investor outrage. And the last counterexample that would be particularly meaningful to me would be Warframe. Warframe was a games-as-service game that started out extremely janky and very difficult to play, and has done nothing but improve and become better over time. My counterpoint when talking about Digital Extremes, however, is that when they started Warframe, they were not actually beholden to publishers or investors. Digital Extremes as a studio struggled a lot in those early days with trying to succeed with licensed games or trying to fulfill the requests of a publisher and having to compromise on their original game concepts in order to do it. Particularly, the game Dark Sector was going to be Warframe originally, but the publisher had so many of their hands in it that it turned into something else and was fairly unsuccessful. In other words, Digital Extremes started Warframe from the position of being player-focused and seeking only the support and the funding from players. I may be somewhat wrong on that, but it's my understanding of the history of Warframe. Neither did Warframe put pause on the release of development with the promise of something bigger, a big fix coming later on down the line. Rather, they simply released content, released gameplay changes and gameplay improvements over time, multiple times every year since, an actual games-as-service model. And only recently have they become more beholden to different sorts of investors, namely being acquired by Tencent, and thus Tencent's investors have a stake in Warframe's success now. Anthem Next didn't die. It wasn't cancelled because there was never going to be an Anthem Next, because there was never any motivation on the part of the publisher to fix the game. They already had their money. They didn't have a player base that would continue to spend money on the game, so why spend all the money necessary to develop and fix the game when it wouldn't recoup any losses? This is the mentality that you have to expect from AAA game developers. They are business first and artists second, and the people who make the decisions of whether or not a game continues or is cancelled come from the people who care more about the money than the art. From the perspective of a consumer, someone who decides to invest on a pre-order as opposed to waiting and seeing if the game is actually worth their money, these are the kind of things you have to accept, the kinds of things you have to predict and expect. If you pre-order a game and it's bad, you should expect to be up the creek without a paddle. So as a general rule, just don't pre-order games as service, especially if it's from a AAA developer, because they have no intention of doing right by you if the game turns out to be crap, and they are actively incentivized to release an unfinished game for cheap so that they can make a lot of profit in case the service strikes gold and gets a lot of players right away. I apologize if this opinion is a little rough around the edges, but hopefully keeping this in mind will help you to be a more savvy consumer of games in the future. I'm not trying to throw shade on BioWare. I really hope that the next Dragon Age game is really great, but it's important to know the people you're buying from in order to avoid buying a crappy game. Hope you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time.